The dining room looked perfect that night. The chandelier glowed softly, reflecting off polished silverware and crystal glasses. My mother had spent hours preparing the meal, not because she enjoyed cooking, but because appearances mattered in our house. Perfection was expected, silence was preferred, and honesty was dangerous. My father sat at the head of the table like a judge. His tailored suit was still on, even at dinner, as if power couldn't be taken off with a jacket. My younger brother laughed at something on his phone, untouched by the tension already forming in the air. I sat across from my father, hands folded in my lap, rehearsing my answers in my head before he even asked a question. "So," he said finally, not looking at me, "what exactly are you doing with your life now?" The room froze. "I've been working on a community education project." I began carefully, "helping kids who don't have access to," he laughed. Loud, sharp, dismissive, education. He interrupted, "You had everything handed to you and still managed to do nothing remarkable." My mother lowered her eyes. The sound of forks against plates suddenly felt too loud. "I'm trying to build something meaningful," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. That's when he looked directly at me. His expression wasn't angry, it was worse. Disappointed, bored, almost annoyed. "You know what your problem is," he said coldly. "You're worthless, no drive, no impact, just taking up space." The word landed like a slap. Worthless. My chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I waited just for a second for someone to say something, for my mother to object, for my brother to defend me. No one did. I pushed my chair back slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast, I might break completely. "Excuse me," I whispered. As I walked away, my father didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. Instead, he muttered, "Don't be dramatic. If you can't handle the truth, that's not my fault." I closed my bedroom door and collapsed onto the floor. The walls felt closer than ever. I stared at my hands, wondering how they could belong to someone so worthless. That night, I cried until my chest hurt, not because of what he said, but because part of me believed him. And I had no idea that this moment, this humiliation, would become the first step toward everything he said I could never be. For 3 days after that dinner, I barely spoke to anyone. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to make noise, careful not to exist too loudly. My father didn't bring up what he had said, which somehow hurt more than an apology ever could. To him, the damage was already done and not worth revisiting. I poured myself into my work instead. Late nights, handwritten notes, half-finished grant applications. The community education project was the only place where I didn't feel small. Those kids didn't ask about my last name or my failures. They just listened when I spoke, and somehow, that made me feel real again. On the fourth morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at the screen, annoyed. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something in me, maybe habit, maybe desperation, made me answer. "Hello. May I speak with?" A calm, professional voice asked. "This is she. This is Senator Hale's office. The senator has reviewed your literacy initiative proposal and would like to meet you in person." I laughed, a short, nervous sound. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake," the voice replied. "The senator was impressed by your work, especially the way you built it without institutional support. He requested a meeting tomorrow at 10. My heart began to race, my hands were shaking now. "Tomorrow," I repeated. "Yes, his office will send the details shortly." The call ended before I could ask another question. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at nothing. My father had spent years trying to get close to that senator, hosting fundraisers, writing checks, dropping hints at every opportunity. And yet the meeting he wanted so badly had come to me instead, uninvited. The irony made me laugh and cry at the same time. That night, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want their sudden interest or delayed support. I wanted this moment to belong to me alone. I laid out my notes, rehearsed my words, and tried to quiet the voice in my head that still whispered worthless. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, dressed simply. No borrowed confidence, no family name to lean on, just me. As I walked into the senator's office, fear tried to pull me back, but for the first time I didn't listen, because somewhere between that dinner table and this doorway, something inside me had shifted, and I was finally ready to be seen. Weeks passed, and life felt like it was moving at a pace I hadn't known was possible. The meeting with Senator Hale had gone better than I could have imagined. He didn't just listen. He believed in me. He offered mentorship, resources, and introductions that suddenly made my small project feel monumental. The Riverside Youth Literacy Initiative began to gain attention. Local news stations picked up our story. Social media pages I had hesitated to create were flooded with messages from educators, parents, and volunteers. Donations trickled in and soon grew into serious funding. Children I had never met before were reading better, writing more confidently, and daring to dream. Every success, every smile, every message of gratitude felt like a quiet victory against the voice that had once told me I was worthless. Then came the public recognition, an invitation to a formal political dinner. The event was a gathering of the city's elite, hosted by prominent donors and attended by the very people my father had long tried to impress. When I saw the invitation addressed to me personally, I hesitated. For years, I had avoided these events, knowing they were arenas of false smiles and whispered judgments. But this time, I knew I had something to say without words. My accomplishments. The night of the event, I entered quietly, wearing a simple dress and no designer labels. My father, seated at the head of the table, didn't notice me at first. He was too busy greeting guests and nodding politely, the air of authority he carried effortlessly in public still intact. But the room hushed when Senator Hale took the stage. He held the microphone and smiled warmly at the crowd before his eyes landed on me. "Before we begin, I want to introduce someone very special," he said, "someone whose work reminds us all why leadership matters, someone who has overcome incredible obstacles and still chosen to build rather than break." The room fell silent. My father's confident mask faltered slightly as murmurs began to ripple across the audience. This young woman, the senator continued, faced doubt, neglect, and disbelief. She was told she was nothing, yet she proved the world wrong. Her work is changing lives, and her courage is inspiring us all. I walked forward slowly, deliberately, feeling each step as a silent triumph. The applause rose, and I saw my father's face pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, he couldn't control the narrative, couldn't command respect, couldn't diminish me. That night, the room didn't just recognize me. It confirmed what I had begun to understand in the quiet aftermath of my father's cruelty. My worth was never determined by him, and now the world was finally seeing it too. Later that evening, after the applause had faded and the crowd had begun to mingle, I found myself standing near the quiet corner of the grand hall. My father approached me, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. There was hesitation in his step, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they've lost control. "I didn't know," he said softly, almost as if admitting it would undo years of pride. "You should have told me about all this." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel the need to shrink or justify myself. I had spent so long seeking his approval. aching for his recognition, that I forgot I could define my worth on my own terms. You were too busy telling me who I wasn't. I said quietly, my voice calm but steady, no anger, no trembling, just truth. Silence hung between us. For a moment it felt almost sacred. He searched my face for a reaction, any sign that he still held power over me, but I was free of that weight. "I'm proud of you," he finally said, his voice low, almost grudging. I shook my head gently. "That's okay. I don't need it anymore." And with that, I walked away, not in triumph, not in vengeance, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally claimed their own life. The crowd, the accolades, the senator's words, all of it had been validation, yes, but the real victory was internal. I had survived the humiliation, the doubt, and the cruelty. I had built something lasting, something meaningful, something undeniable. The sweetest revenge is not humiliation or confrontation. It is growth. It is proving that the people who tried to break you can no longer define you. It is achieving success quietly, gracefully, and unapologetically. As I stepped out of the hall into the cold night air, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. My father remained inside, surrounded by power and influence, yet unable to touch the part of me that had finally learned to soar. The word worthless, once thrown like a dagger at my heart, now had no meaning. I smiled, not at him, not at the crowd, but at myself, because in that moment I realized something crucial. The person who tries to diminish you can never take away the strength, determination, and courage that lives inside you. And in building a life that even they could not ignore, I had achieved a quiet, unshakable triumph. A revenge sweeter than anger, louder than words, and more permanent than their approval could ever be. I had won, not by hurting him, not by proving him wrong, but by proving myself right, and that was enough.